Hi everyone, this is Joanna Pilatovic, and I have with me Jason Thompson all the way from Uruguay to our South Germany. Hi Jason, how are you there?
Hi, good morning. It's morning here.
Yes, exactly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're gonna hear that. So I invited today Jason, a specialist in so many things. Let me just start to introduce you a little bit and then you're gonna continue. So Jason teaches psychogenealogy. He's from United States. He currently lives in Uruguay, and he also is teaching biological decoding, total biology. He's an also Reiki master from Usui, Shiki, Ryoho. I have the same lineage actually, but I don't pronounce it maybe very well. So please correct me if I'm wrong here. And you also have your personal growth center in San Diego. And you are also family constellation therapist. That's a lot. That sounds like a lot of passion there. So my first question to you is how did all that started?
Well, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to do this recording. I started in 1984 studying with Louise Hay in Santa Monica. I was
Wow.
living in San Diego at the time, and I found her and started doing her work and her affirmations and going to her workshops every week, twice a week, and organized her classes in San Diego and completely changed my life. And that's when I created the Personal Growth Center in San Diego.
Wow.
So that was 35 years ago, and life just keeps going on and developing. And then I found family constellation therapy and did the training at the Hellinger Center in Uruguay for 3 years. And then I found total biology and did the training here. I actually do biological decoding. I don't teach total biology. That's my teacher, Enrique. But
Mhm.
I do the consultations, the decoding, and I teach psychogenealogy. So it all really fits together. It's amazing when you're on this path because in the family constellation work, we get in touch with the invisible loyalties that we might have with an ancestor that are creating blocks and causing problems in our life and ways of clearing that up. And in psychogenealogy, we do the same thing. So I'll explain a little bit how all that works and how it all fits together. And yes, it is my passion. I love what I do, and that's one of the things I learned with Louise A. 35 years ago, that it's important to do what you love, and then everything works out.
I'm just processing that. You knew personally Louis Hay and Bert Hellinger. For me, that's huge because that's teachers I started from their books a long time ago, of course. And in New York, that was my first book about spirituality, Louis Hay, and maybe Sanaya Roman. So that's amazing. Please continue.
Well, I mean, that's one of the advantages of being in California because I did a lot of workshops with Neil Marshall Walsh, who wrote the book
Oh,
uh,
wow.
Conversations with
Quite a
God.
lot doing all that.
And that was before he was famous, you know. I mean, that was before he wrote his book, and he was a ghostwriter for Terry Cole Whitaker. And anyway, it was a great experience. You know, I'm really grateful for the universe for all the experiences and all the things I was able to learn in California and bring to South America. It's kind of my mission in life.
Mhm.
But anyway, the biological decoding story starts in Germany in 1978 with a German doctor named Dr. Hammer. And we don't have time to go into a lot of details, but Dr. Hammer's son was injured in a very tragic accident, and then he developed testicular cancer. And as he began to do the research, he discovered that all the men with that type of cancer had a tragic loss with respect to a son or daughter. So he began to understand the biological sense of why the brain sent the stress to the reproductive part, because it was the part that created the son. And he healed. He became aware. This work has a lot to do with becoming conscious. They become conscious. And the phrase that we use is that every pain and every illness is a biological solution to a conflict. So
Mm-hmm.
this is something that all the people who are listening today can take with them and know that if they process the stress, because we all have conflict. And one of the things that conflict does is conflict produces stress. And so we have a normal stress curve like this, up and down, gentle, it's okay. But when we have a big conflict, the stress goes up and up and up and up to the point where the brain knows that the physical body can't survive because the physical body can't handle more than a certain level of stress. So the brain sends the stress to some part of the body to bring the curve back to the normal curve. So when we have a big conflict and a big stress, if we process it, if we scream and cry and go to therapy and do Reiki and meditate and yoga and whatever we need to do, dance therapy, and process all that stress, then the brain doesn't need to send a future illness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my main message today is for people to understand that if they do have a pain or an illness, that it was a biological solution to some conflict. And if they can decode that and understand that, then that helps the brain to heal.
Mm-hmm. I have a question here because
Okay.
some people argue that not every sickness is psychosomatic, and they can go arguing for a long time that if they have a tooth pain or they just getting sick because everybody is sick, it's just the time in the season. How do you how do you respond to that if somebody was telling you, oh, I just got sick, it's just normal thing, every now and then my throat hurts?
Right. Well, everybody has their own path. And, biological decoding is not for everybody, nor is psychogenealogy. I love psychogenealogy. I've been doing my family tree for 37 years. It's something that makes my heart sing doing psychogenealogy, but some people don't like it. So it just, it depends on the person. We have certain ideas in total biology that when I went to the first classes with Enrique Barone, who was my teacher, I knew that it was the truth. I could feel the truth. I knew that it was true. I mean, I had already studied with Louise L about the emotional and mental causes of illness, so I already had some background that prepared me for that. And so I pursued that, knowing that it's a biological solution to a conflict. And one of the ideas that was kind of surprising for me in total biology, because it's a new way of thinking about medicine, about healing, about illness. And it takes a while to change the filters in our brain because we grow up with the medical system the way it is. And there are lots of new doctors now. When I took Enrique's class for the first time, there were 2 doctors in the class. And the last time I took it, there were 12. So every year there were a few more doctors. So now in Uruguay, we have more and more doctors who know about biological decoding. And so anyway, one of the ideas is that there's no such thing as contagion. We don't believe in contagion.
Mm-hmm.
So if a person has the flu, it's because they have the flu conflict.
Interesting.
And yes. So we don't believe that it passes from one person to another. I'm not afraid of being around sick people because if I don't have the conflict, it's not going to affect me. That's just, that's our belief system. So people can either believe that or not believe that, and it doesn't really matter, whatever they want to believe. If someone is ill and I think that decoding can help them, then, that I might suggest it or offer it. And if they want to do it, we do it. If they don't, they don't. It's just doing respect that person's choice.
Mm-hmm. Great. So basically, if the person is aware enough, then she can recognize where the conflict was. But what about the people that they cannot find the link, how they are getting sick? Like they see, but yeah, but I didn't do anything. It's just I didn't think negative thoughts. How do you trace that, or how do you teach them to help them be more aware so they can do it on their own?
Well, There's one technique that I can teach in 5 minutes that anybody can do. You wanted something that people could take away from today that could benefit people. So when someone comes for a session or someone wants to decode, the first thing that we ask is, what is the diagnosis? So we begin with the diagnosis. So it's helpful to have a doctor do the diagnosis so we can know exactly what part of the body. This is Enrique's book, and it's like a dictionary, and it has
Oh,
parts of the body. You know, each bone, each muscle, each joint has this different conflict. It's quite a complex process.
mhm.
But anyway, so we start with the diagnosis and their age, their birth date, and then with their age at the date of the first symptom. So those are the initial questions. So the first place we look is when the symptom began.
Mhm.
So that's what we're looking for, is a conflict that was resolved around the time of the first symptom. It could be the day before or a week before. If it's the flu, if they have the flu, you can be sure that they had a family conflict that was resolved the day before. You know,
Okay.
every time, I've decoded dozens of people like that, and every time, we always find it. And that's why, maybe several people in the same family have the flu, because they all had the same conflict and they all resolved it at the same time. And so they all get sick together, not because the bug was flying around, because
So they
they had a conflict and they solved it. Yeah. So that's an easy thing to do. So because usually 90% the illness appears when the conflict is resolved. So
exactly.
that was the big shift in consciousness for me with total biology, because I thought that people had active conflicts when they were ill, but usually
Which
it's the opposite.
they already
So
solved it.
it's already solved. There are a few things like diabetes is usually an active conflict. High blood pressure,
What
asthma can
kind of
be
conflict is that? Diabetes?
I'm sorry.
Is there general description? Like what kind of conflict can be diabetes?
Well, it's really interesting the way we decode. There are lots of different ways to decode, but one is to analyze the meaning of the word. So if you look at the word diabetes, dia means divided.
Okay.
And bet is the Hebrew letter for the house, the home.
Wow.
So diabetes means the home divided.
Interesting.
So usually there's a divorce, a fight, some kind of misunderstanding with their mother, their partner, a child, some type of separation in the home. So that's one of the main conflicts for diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is resistance. So a lot of times people who have diabetes have resistance to look at the conflicts, and it's because, and that's what the reason they have diabetes, because they have resistance. That's one of the main characteristics of the ego, as you know, is resistance. The ego wants to maintain the things the way they are, so the ego doesn't want to change.
Yeah.
But I
Mm-hmm.
have a great story about diabetes. That this woman came and her blood sugar was 300 and she was taking medication and it wasn't helping. And
Mm-hmm.
so the doctor told her she needed to start injecting insulin. And she came to me the next day and we decoded, and we found that, well, with diabetes, let me say this. So usually with diabetes, the first time that the sugar goes up is when the conflict is resolved.
Okay.
So that for diabetes, it's really important to identify when it began. And sometimes the people don't know, because it starts to go up little by little by little. They don't have any symptoms and they don't realize it until it's already really high. But if
Mm-hmm.
you can identify it, then that's much better. In her case, we were able to identify it. So her sugar went up for the first time when she solved a family conflict,
Mm-hmm.
separation in the family. And looking back through her life, She had separation from her mother when she was a teenager. Then her father passed away. Then her husband passed away. She had all these separations that were programming diabetes for her. And when she realized that in the session, then the next day her blood sugar dropped.
Mm-hmm.
So she started taking half the medication, and it still kept dropping. By the third day, she stopped taking any medication, and her blood sugar was 90. So it was perfectly normal in 3 days.
How
So
did you manage that?
that's like my greatest success story in decoding is that she was able to decode and understand and have her blood sugar normal without medication in 3 days.
Mm-hmm. We want to know all about it. How did you do that? How did you, what is there any process, general process, or maybe this 5 minutes, what you told, maybe you can present that formula so people can try it out themselves. How is it possible to get to it? Of course, if they want to go deeper, then probably few sessions would be helpful.
Well, typically people only usually do one session. Okay, and Reiki recommends three, my teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But usually we find the conflicts in one session and the person heals and and they don't need to come back. Maybe some people come back. It just, it depends on the person. But the biological decoding is a year-long course. There are 5 modules, and the last module is 4 days. And so it's like a lot of complicated concepts that I can't really explain in an interview. But what I would say is that what people can do is look for the conflict that was resolved.
Mm-hmm.
A day or a week, close to the time that the illness appeared. And so
Right.
that's the best thing they can do. Another thing that's really easy for people to learn
Mm-hmm.
is about children. I've decoded a lot of children, and they heal really quickly, and it really helped me a lot in the beginning of my practice was to decode these children, because the children are not born with their own conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the brain and for the subconscious mind, the symbolic and the physical are the same. So symbolically for the brain, 9 years is the same as 9 months. So
Mm-hmm.
this is the technique we use to decode children. If a child becomes ill when they're 9 years or younger, the conflict came during the mother's pregnancy.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And so the way we find it is by identifying what happened in the month corresponding to the age of the child when they became ill.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the first child I decoded had an anger disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked his mother, the first question is, how old was he when it began? And she said he was 5 years old. So the second question is to ask what happened in the 5th month of pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that her husband beat her up and she was hospitalized for 4 months. And then the baby was born in the hospital.
Ouch. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he was angry at his father. So she started talking to his subconscious mind, and he never had another anger attack.
Oh, so that's the solution, because the seeing the conflict is one thing. You have to trace it back, which can be difficult for people at the very beginning, obviously. But then once you know it, there is a certain things to do. You need to express it somehow. So what do you recommend is something that people can do straight away if they, let's say, accidentally find out what the conflict was?
Yeah, well, let me give you another example, and then I think maybe we need to finish up for now because we've been talking for talking for a while.
But it's
It's a
okay.
pleasure. I could talk about this all day. I love it, but I don't know how long people will be willing to listen.
We find out.
Right. So yeah, it'll be interesting to get the feedback in the comments. So this woman was walking down the street one night and she came to a really dark corner and a man with a mask on jumped out of the shadows and put a gun to her head and said, "Be quiet." So you can imagine what happened to her stress level. It was off the top of the scale. He stole her money and let her go, and she went home. So 2 months later, she was walking down the street, and suddenly she realized she was going to come to the same corner. So you can imagine how her body reacted. Her heart started beating fast, her adrenaline started pumping, she was feeling afraid. She got to the corner and nothing happened. So she went home. The next morning, she woke up with laryngitis.
Yeah.
Laryngitis because the scream that was programmed in her throat needed to heal. So as I mentioned earlier, the illness is part of the healing process. So the brain said, oh, okay, well, we need to heal this scream now. Let's manifest that laryngitis and heal her throat. So she decoded and healed very quickly. So the way she decoded was by the person decoding, who actually was my teacher. He said, what did you do the day before you got sick? And so, so she went through her whole day. Well, I went to the shopping center and I did this. And then all of a sudden she was going through her day. She remembered she went by that corner. And boom, it was like we have a bingo. The person has a reaction. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they get goosebumps. We look for that reaction in the person to know that we found the conflict. And then she healed very quickly because she understood, why she had this laryngitis.
So
It was
just the fact
a
it's a bit.
biological it was a biological solution to her conflict.
Just
So
because she heard that, it was enough for her to heal. That's what you're saying?
yeah, to decode, to become aware, like Dr. Hammer, when he became aware that he had cancer because of the tragic accident of his son, then he healed by
Okay. Could it be that
becoming
simple?
conscious. Go ahead.
Right. It sounds very simple, It sounds absolutely simple. It's just making the moment of this, aha, okay, that's why it's happening to me. But then could it be really that simple if people are aware, oh, it's happening to me because this and this happened? Oh, I guess I'm healed now. Could it be that simple? Or is there something they still need to do, whether they need to work with themselves a little bit more, giving themselves some sort of affirmation or acknowledgement, okay, that happened to me? Because there are different schools in this, maybe different schools, because I heard few people about total biology, and they recommend some sentences they're supposed to tell themselves. How is it for you? What do you recommend?
Okay, well, that you're right. It can be complicated. It depends. Sometimes the healing is instantaneous. With the children, it's instantaneous because they're not their conflicts. It's really easy. With an adult, what happens sometimes is that they go back into active conflict. So let's say, for example, a urinary tract infection for a woman is being invaded, having her space invaded. A lot of times it could be by the mother-in-law coming into the kitchen and stirring the soup and, trying to help her cook or something. And so, so if she decodes that and understands, then she can heal. But then, next Sunday, if the mother-in-law comes back and continues to go in the kitchen and invade her space, then it can come back. So once
Right.
we decode and know what the conflict is and what the conflict that was solved, we need to make sure that we take care of ourselves and our limits and our space and our life, and don't allow the conflict to reemerge. So
We not
that's
allow the mother-in-law to the kitchen anymore, I suppose.
exactly. Let her stay in the living room and the dining room and be served the food.
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
You say a lot the word decoding. I just want to make sure that people understand, what do we mean by that? What does it mean to decode? Oh, I decoded my conflict. So what exactly I do? I understood what happened, and then what is the next action I'm supposed to do? So now I know I have to be aware of that, to not let this situation in my life, but maybe I'm not able to avoid it, you know, maybe that mother-in-law will still keep on coming, or, you know, or partner, or a child, or whatever happens, or the work situation.
That is a great question, Joanna. And actually, the problem is not exactly the conflict, but the problem is the stress. So the conflict is possible in some cases for the conflict to continue, but if like for example, for the mother-in-law to keep coming in the kitchen, but if the person doesn't generate stress, then the brain doesn't need to send the illness. So the key is how people deal with the stress. And so one of the phrases, well, actually it's an exercise. There are a couple of phrases that I send to people by email after the session to do the phrases, the symbolic story that you're talking about. But what I explain to people is that for them to have a dialogue, this is the homework, to have a dialogue between the brain, the mind, and the body. So with the mind, they'll say, wow, I just had an amazing decoding. I really understand, why I broke my finger, or, why I have a cavity in my tooth number 12, and tell that to the brain and ask the brain, okay, brain, now I understand the conflict is resolved, and please heal my body.
Right, because
nothing happens in the body without a command from the brain. So people don't get sick without a command from the brain, and they don't heal without a command from the brain. So then the brain can tell the body, okay, well, Jason understands, and we can heal that. So let me tell you a simple example that happened to me. I was taking a class one weekend, and I didn't like the class. And so I was a little stressed all day long with this class. I went to the grocery store after class, and I was coming home, and I thought, I'm not going to go back tomorrow. It was Saturday and Sunday. I'm not going to go back tomorrow. I don't like this class, and I'm not going to go back. Immediately, I sprained my ankle. I stepped in a hole and sprained my ankle. And so fortunately, I was close to home, so I hobbled home, got out the book, and it says, deciding not to do what you don't want to do.
Oh, you just solved the conflict, but your ankle still was hurting you.
No, that's why I sprained it, because I solved the conflict. I solved the conflict when I decided not to go back. Immediately, my body sprained my ankle. That released the stress. And when I decoded, in 5 minutes, my ankle was completely healed. It didn't hurt anymore.
Oh, okay.
So that's the advantage of decoding, is that the healing is very fast.
So decoding means gaining awareness about the conflict.
Well, the code, for to be specific, the code for the sprained ankle is deciding not to do what I didn't want to do.
Even better, because you decide to change.
Code.
You know already
So what was programmed was the stress of doing a class that I didn't want to do. And once I solved that conflict, then my body manifested the sprained ankle, and it healed when I decoded.
Okay.
So let me sum it up in a different way. Decoding is understanding that an illness was a biological solution to a conflict. The illness was a solution. If you go to a regular doctor with a pain, for them it's a problem. For us, it's exactly the opposite. It's a solution. That's the big shift in consciousness.
Let me ask you now about addictions, because with the ankles, your decision is pretty clear, and people can make that decision. Now there is another situation of addictions or situations you cannot avoid. So let's say someone is addicted on alcohol, or someone doesn't like his work, that he has to work full time, has a family, and but every time he goes to that work, he hates it. He cannot just leave the class like you did. Or people have this, addictive tendency, or I don't know, foods, alcohol, smoking cigarettes, and they cannot quit. They want to. They would like to make the decision, just, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not going to go there anymore. So I see the similarity of repeating the situations. You kind of feel forced into them. You cannot stop them, whether chemical addictions or psychological, social circumstances. How do you decode that?
Well, each addiction has a different code.
Okay.
For example, cocaine is white and represents purity, and people who are addicted to cocaine have some kind of compulsion, some kind of need to purify themselves to be pure.
Okay.
Heroin, the code is in the name. Heroin has hero, or heroine for a woman is a heroine.
Yeah.
Like the female of the hero.
Right.
And decoded several people with heroin addiction, and they all had the role in their family that they had to be a hero in some way and heal the family, solve the problem of the family, and they couldn't do it. And so the conflict created desire for heroin.
Interesting, because it's important to understand that it is also like a 90% of the healing process to understand the conflict. Can you give a little bit more example for the cigarettes, alcohol, obesity, something the most popular, what touches our society?
Well, for marijuana, it usually has to do with some difficulty in implanting the embryon in the uterus, because it's the chemical in the uterus is a cannabinoid, and when there's a problem with the pregnancy, it creates a desire for the cannabinoid, and then the person has a desire to smoke marijuana. So I had a client who came because her son was addicted to marijuana. And so I asked her if she had had any abortions, and she said yes. And so that was the difficulty of implanting the embryon in the uterus, whether she was aborting her babies.
That's amazing, because normal people cannot almost trace that. It's just, to make a link between something that happened so much before and then maybe adult son or teenage son, it's almost like not traceable, but it's interesting. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, I mean, the information is always enough, we always find the information. But anyway, so I asked her, I said, does your son know that you had these abortions? Because they're his brothers and sisters who weren't born.
Right.
And she said no. And I said, well, it would be good for you to tell him. So when she told him, he stopped smoking marijuana.
Oh wow!
So that was another one of my great success stories. But since you asked me about overeating, there's a story that's also on my website. I was trying to tell stories differently, that in case people were listening to both, but this one's important for people who have a problem with overeating. So as I mentioned earlier, everybody has conflicts. It's important, and it's a normal part of life is conflict. And if our ancestors had a conflict and didn't solve it, then there's no way they can solve it today. So it gets passed on to someone who's alive. This is the psychogenealogy. We take genealogy and the psyche and put them together, and we get this new word, psychogenealogy.
Like a collective consciousness.
And so it's the genealogy of the psyche. We all have psyche as the structure of the human psyche. It's I base mine more in Jungian psychology, because I really like Carl Jung. And by the way, Carl Jung is the father of psychogenealogy.
Oh, that's how it's called now. Okay.
So that's near you down there, just below Germany. But anyway, so if they didn't solve a conflict, then it gets passed on to a descendant to have another chance to solve this conflict. And what we look for are called invisible loyalties. That's what we look for when we do a family constellation. You may have heard that phrase in your constellation workshop. We're looking for an invisible loyalty.
Yeah.
And so the person is expressing something. Like I had a client who had a huge desire to be a doctor, and she couldn't get into medical school. And she was studying for 3 years, and every year she would fail the exam. And so we found out that her great-great-grandfather died for lack of medical attention. So she needed to be a doctor because her great-great-grandfather needed a doctor. The next time she took the exam, then I asked her, I said, do you really want to be a doctor? You know you're doing this for your great-great-grandfather. She said, yes, I want to be a doctor. The next time she took the exam, she passed. But that was after decoding. She understood why it was so important. So after we decode, then we become free to choose. You know, do I want to be a doctor, or do I want to be an accountant? An accountant because somebody stole my grandmother's money.
Yeah. So it's
so that kind of thing. But getting back to the woman who was overeating, she had done many types of diets, a lot of therapy, and she couldn't stop eating. And when a person, this is another bit of information that's helpful for your clients, for your community. I don't know how you want to, but the people who are listening, is that when they've done a lot of therapy and workshops and process and they're not able to work it out, then it probably came from an ancestor. Because there's no way, since it's not from this actual lifetime, then there's no way in this lifetime really to work it out. You know, we need to discover where it came from, the origin, and then it heals very quickly. But anyway, so we did this process in psychogenealogy, which is called open your tree, opening her family tree. And we discovered that 2 of her great-grandparents had 7 children, and her great-grandfather passed away. And there wasn't enough food for everybody. So the mother didn't eat in order to give food to her children. So my client was eating for her great-grandmother. And she didn't know this story before.
Of course.
Yeah. So in 1 month, she lost 10 pounds without going on diet. And she has now lost 70 pounds. And she's down to her perfect weight without being hungry, without going on a diet, without doing anything except, becoming aware that she had an invisible loyalty with her great-grandmother who was hungry. So that's why she needed to eat.
Right. It's incredible how it works. It sounds almost like a mini possession, like the spirit somewhere there stayed and try to live through that pain that was not acknowledged, maybe through someone else. So we should ask for whom I'm eating, drinking, smoking, or working so hard, or whatever is the issue going on. It's absolutely amazing. So it's usually not the problem from this person. So we shouldn't take our problem so personal. Maybe someone else's problem, and just find out whose problem is that.
That's exactly what we do when we open the tree. The way that I think about it, Joanna, it's like a memory that the person left in the soul of the family. This is what I learned when I was doing the family constellation training. This is the way I explained it in my family constellation workshops, and I do the same thing with psychogenealogy. It's like the woman, the great-grandmother's hunger was recorded in the memory of the family soul, and it was this memory that got passed on through her unconscious to the unconscious of her grandmother, to the unconscious of her mother, to her unconscious, and then expressed in her. It's not actually the spirit of her great grandmother, but it's an energy that stays in the family soul. That's the way that I explain it.
Okay, so it's a memory,
Exactly.
something that is waving. So it's
Right.
beyond time thing, because we have a timelines here, but in energy, everything it's happening now. So it's keep on happening until it's maybe processed or solved. Yeah.
There's a great book about constellations written by a Dutch man who studied with Hellinger. It's called Family Constellations in Shamanism.
Mm.
And and he talks about the similarities between shamanism and family constellation work, because we open this space where time doesn't exist. The past, the present, and the future exist simultaneously. So in a constellation, for example, sometimes the person's future husband will show up in the constellation and she hasn't even met him yet, but there he is because there's no time. And the psychogenealogy is similar. I want to get back to the story about the woman who was robbed, and then I think we need to finish up here.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
so I really like the story about the woman who was robbed, because the one who had laryngitis, because it shows how we can live without becoming ill in the future. So the night of the robbery, when she got home, what she needed to do was to scream, to cry, to call a friend and say, it was horrible. I didn't know if he was going to rape me. I didn't know if he was going to kill me. It was awful, and process all that stress. And then she didn't need to become ill.
Okay. So it's expression, it's important.
But she didn't do that. She went home and she thought, oh, well, it's no big deal. He stole my money. It wasn't that much money. And, I'm fine. Nothing happened. She went to sleep and forgot about it. But the moment of the robbery, when he put the gun at her head, her stress was off the top of the scale. And her brain sent that to her throat. So her brain knew. The brain knows everything. One time I was driving down the street and a car turned left in front of me, and I swerved the car and blew the horn before I even saw the car. So how did that happen? The information went in through my optic nerve faster than I could process it, and my brain told my arms to swerve the car, and I didn't have an accident. Do you see what I'm saying? So the brain is taking in information all the time, processing it and giving us, decisions and commands to the body and all that. So
It has a task to keep us alive. So yeah.
exactly. The main goal of the brain is survival.
Yeah, and it has no sense of humor. It takes everything what we give. As we know, yeah. Fantastic.
You're right on track, Joanna. Yes,
I know.
great. That's a great comment to finish up on.
Yeah, we're gonna do part 2 because there is so much more I want to ask you, and I'm a little bit jumping through the subjects because there is something to touch on family constellation. I am more interested about that tree, that genealogy tree. How do you exactly work with that? Whatever you can share would be fantastic. And some simple steps for people to, that they could try on. And of course, for working with you. So you work with the people, how they can reach you? How do you do sessions for Skype with them, or do they have to come to you personally?
No, I do. I have clients all over the world, in many countries. I've had clients in Germany, and England, and Japan, and Indonesia, and Vietnam, and lots of different places. Yeah. So a lot of clients in the U.S. So yeah, we do it by Skype.
Okay, we're gonna leave some note after the video. And I know you're gonna be teaching soon. Where is your next teaching? You're leading groups. You're teaching in San Diego still, and where is the next one?
Yeah, I'm teaching. Well, I'm teaching in Brazil next week.
Oh, right.
And then in March, I'm teaching in San Diego.
All right. So anybody who's going to be in San Diego, we're going to leave a note or website to you so they can keep updated if someone is interested to find out more. And I'm going to gather probably more questions from my community, and I like to sometimes keep asking them why the interview. So people can comment on it and people can start rethinking already what's happening and how they can start getting more awareness. So thank you very, very much for sharing.
Let me just, excuse me for interrupting. Let me say one more thing because you
Yes.
touched on something that's really important.
Great.
So as we're doing this interview, the information is going into the mind, to the brain, and to the subconscious mind. So the information is touching programs in the subconscious mind for the people, and it bubbles up into consciousness to be healed. And so one of the things that's helpful is the people that are listening to this to pay attention to your dreams tonight and next week, because the subconscious communicates with us through our dreams. So many times, you know, my clients find codes in their dreams. But anyway, so everybody who's open and willing to it, listening to this interview, is in a healing process, and the information is touching on things important. Like you had several aha moments during the interview. The information's bubbling up to be healed. And so it's a process that has its own momentum. It's just a natural process.
You just touched on another great subject. I'm going to ask you in another interview about dreams, because I'm big on dreams. I'm a writer and half of my books are about dreams. But also it's very important you mentioned that you do work with dreams. They are important. They bring the content already that it's easier for people to work with.
So yesterday I had a session with a woman who was decoding an illness that her daughter had when she was a child. And she still had it, you know, as an adult, but it started when she was a child. And I told her 6 weeks ago when she scheduled the appointment, I said, you know, your daughter doesn't need to come because, you know, this was your conflict when you were pregnant with her. And so, you know, we'll decode, and your daughter will probably, will already feel better once you schedule your appointment. So we scheduled the appointment for 6 weeks later because I was out of town. And she came yesterday and she said that her daughter had already healed before she even had the session, simply because I told her that the conflict was not her daughter's, it was hers, and that was enough for her daughter to heal.
This is amazing how we can influence other people by working on ourselves.
Exactly.
Right. Big thing. Okay, with that thought, we're gonna do part 2. Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed this. We're gonna leave you some additional information, and I am looking forward for more. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.